There's a side of desire no one wants to talk about. Not her, not you, not even the textbooks. But Freud, he stared right into it and never flinched. Imagine this. A woman sits across from her therapist, her life seemingly perfect. Career, relationship, confidence. Yet behind her eyes, a storm brews, not of weakness, but of something deeper, more primal. She doesn't know why she's drawn to danger, why kindness bores her, or why the men she should love leave her cold. Freud had a name for this tension, the collision of eros and thanatos, life drive versus death drive, love versus destruction. But here's the disturbing part. Many of her desires, choices, and emotional patterns aren't hers, not consciously. They're shadows, formed by childhood imprints, filtered through repression and tangled in a labyrinth Freud spent his life mapping. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because understanding the female psyche isn't about comfort, it's about unveiling the layers she hides, even from herself. If you're intrigued by how much of human attraction, emotion, and conflict is buried deep in the unconscious, hit that like button, subscribe for more dark psychological insights, and share this video with someone who thinks they've figured women out. Trust me, they haven't. Have you ever wondered why some women, smart, capable, emotionally aware, still find themselves trapped in self-sabotaging cycles? Why they love men who don't love them back or stay silent when they want to scream? It's not a lack of intelligence. It's not weakness. And no, it's not just hormones. It's repression. But not just any repression, a socially engineered, historically reinforced, deeply internalized engine that starts running the moment a girl learns the rules of what it means to be a good woman. And Freud, he was one of the first to see the engine. Picture this: Vienna, late 1800s. Women are fainting in parlors, losing their voices, developing mysterious physical symptoms, and no doctor can explain why. Their bodies are reacting, but there's no disease, no injury, just silence. Freud sits with these women and listens, really listens, and what he hears shakes the foundations of psychology. Behind every symptom is a story that cannot be told. Behind every twitching hand or paralyzed leg is a desire too shameful to name. Behind every good girl is a war zone of thoughts she's been taught to bury. This Freud called repression, the cornerstone of the unconscious mind. He discovered that when powerful emotions, traumas, or urges are deemed unacceptable, especially sexual or aggressive ones, the psyche doesn't erase them. It buries them, presses them down, forces them into the dark basement of the unconscious. But they don't die there. They leak through dreams, through slips of the tongue, through irrational fears and compulsive behaviors, through strange, inexplicable patterns in love and self-worth. For many women in Freud's era, and still today, these repressed energies morph into what society labels mood swings, anxiety, or self-esteem issues. But dig deeper and you'll often find repressed rage, repressed desire, repressed identity. Now here's the disturbing part. Repression isn't something women choose, it's something they're trained into. From a young age, girls receive subtle and not so subtle messages. Be sweet, not angry. Be nurturing, not sexual. Be agreeable, not assertive. Be small, not too much. So she adapts. She learns to smile when she's furious, to laugh when she's hurt, to desire in secret and then punish herself for it. In Freud's case studies, especially women suffering from hysteria, these emotional contradictions were everywhere. One patient, known only as Anna O., developed temporary blindness and paralysis after her father's death. But as Freud and his colleague Joseph Breuer explored her symptoms, they found something darker beneath the grief. Forbidden desire, emotional confusion, guilt she couldn't voice. Anna's body spoke what her conscious mind could not. Freud realized this wasn't madness. It was the logic of the unconscious. Here's where things get even more unsettling. Repression doesn't just bury emotions, it reshapes identity. The more a woman represses, the more disconnected she becomes from what she really wants, what she fears, what excites her, what she's angry about, what she secretly craves. And the result? A fragmented psyche, a split self. On the outside, she's polished, self-controlled, likable. On the inside, she may feel haunted by invisible hands tugging at her choices, hands she can't name but can't ignore either. This is why many women describe a strange, inexplicable pull toward situations that hurt them. toxic relationships, self-denial, emotional martyrdom. It's not because they want to suffer. It's because their repressed self, the one exiled from consciousness, is trying to be heard. Now let's bring it into the modern world. Today's woman might not faint in a parlor, but she might get panic attacks before dates, or lose sleep over needing to be nice instead of honest, or feel guilty for wanting sex or not wanting it at all. And while she scrolls through Instagram seeing endless advice on feminine energy, manifesting love and being high value, her unconscious mind remains locked in the same old trap. Be desirable, but not demanding. Be powerful, but not intimidating. Be vulnerable, but not inconvenient. She's encouraged to know her worth while society conditions her to outsource that worth entirely to how others perceive her. And the engine keeps running. Freud didn't get everything right. He was a man of his time, and yes, many of his theories were filtered through outdated cultural assumptions. But what he did get right, chillingly right, is that the female psyche cannot be understood without understanding repression. Because a woman who knows what she feels, what she needs, what she desires, is a woman who threatens every structure built on her silence. That's why the repression engine isn't just psychological, it's political, cultural, familial, romantic. And that's why unlearning it isn't easy. It requires facing the parts of oneself that have been labeled too much, too dark, too needy, too selfish. It means reclaiming stories that were buried, emotions that were punished, truths that were once too dangerous to speak. But the cost of ignoring repression is losing yourself without ever realizing it. Let's get uncomfortable for a second. Think back to your first image of love. Not your first kiss, not your first crush, but the very first time you learned what power looked like, what protection felt like, what it meant to be seen or ignored or disciplined. For most women, that figure wasn't a romantic partner, it was their father, or the man who played that role. And whether he was kind, cold, absent, loving, cruel, or a mix of all, he became a mirror, a template, not just for how a girl sees men, but for how she sees herself. Freud called this psychic blueprint the Electra complex, the female counterpart to the Oedipus complex. But far beyond clinical terminology lies a haunting psychological truth. Every woman carries an echo of her father in the way she loves. The Electra complex begins in early childhood, when a girl first realizes that her father holds a unique position, a mix of strength, approval, and mystery. Freud believed that a young girl's unconscious desire shifts toward her father not in a literal sexual sense, but as a symbolic yearning to be his chosen one, his favorite, his source of affection and validation. At the same time, the mother becomes the rival, not always consciously but symbolically. She's the one who already has him. She sets the rules, she disciplines, she seems to block the attention. This triangulation creates a psychological loop. If I'm good enough, he'll notice me. If I'm lovable enough, he'll choose me. If I'm perfect enough, I won't be invisible. And this is where things get dark. If that early father figure is emotionally unavailable, overly critical, abusive, or absent altogether, the girl internalizes that absence as a reflection of her worth. She doesn't just feel rejected, she feels unworthy of being chosen. Fast forward to adulthood. Now she's dating men who are distant, withholding, emotionally unpredictable, and she can't stop chasing them. Not because she likes being hurt, but because her psyche learned a long time ago that love, earning approval from someone emotionally unavailable. And it's not always conscious. These women often say, "I don't know why I'm drawn to him. I know he's bad for me, but I can't let go. The nicer guy just didn't feel right." That last line is crucial. Freud believed that the psyche doesn't seek what's healthy. It seeks what's familiar. So if emotional distance felt like home, if criticism felt like attention, if rejection felt like intimacy, then that's what she'll seek again and again and again. Not because she's broken, but because the mirror of the father has never been shattered. And what about women with doting fathers? Even that comes with its own shadow. If a father idealizes his daughter, makes her his emotional confidant, treats her like a little queen, she may grow up expecting every man to treat her the same. But when reality doesn't match that ideal, When men aren't perfect, when relationships require negotiation instead of adoration, she may feel constantly disappointed or swing between extremes, placing men on pedestals, then shattering them when they fall short. In both cases, the critical father or the adoring father, the woman isn't loving the man in front of her. She's still loving the mirror. Here's where things get even more psychologically disorienting. The father doesn't just shape her view of men, he shapes her view of herself as a woman. If he affirms her intellect, her autonomy, her presence, she's more likely to grow into a woman who trusts her own voice. But if he only praises her looks, or only engages when she's obedient, quiet, or performing some version of perfection, then she learns early, my value is conditional, my voice doesn't matter. Being feminine means being pleasing, and those beliefs don't vanish. They become emotional reflexes showing up in job interviews, friendships, sex, leadership, motherhood. Freud knew the father was more than just a family member. He was a symbol of power, of law, of the first external boundary a child encounters. So when that figure is inconsistent, controlling, or emotionally dangerous, it sends a terrifying message to the child. The world is unpredictable. I must adapt to survive. For girls, that adaptation often takes the form of overfunctioning in relationships, of becoming emotional caretakers, of shape-shifting into whatever the man needs just to be safe. And in the process, they lose themselves. But it's not all fate. Psychologists today, building on Freud's early theories, believe these patterns can be confronted, not by demonizing the father, but by disrupting the mirror, by asking, am I loving this man, or am I trying to earn something I never got? Am I attracted to his presence, or haunted by his absence? Is this relationship feeding me, or repeating me? These aren't easy questions. They threaten the very structure of early love, but they're necessary, because no matter what your father gave you or failed to give, you're not trapped in his reflection. You can choose to stop chasing ghosts. You can stop loving through old wounds. You can break the mirror. It starts with a twitch, then a numbness, a sudden inability to speak, breathe, walk without a single biological cause. No fever, no broken bones, just dysfunction. Out of nowhere. To the outside world, she looks dramatic, overwhelmed, too emotional. To the medical system, she's a mystery. But to Freud, she was a revelation. Because what the world called hysteria, he saw as a language, a psychological scream translated through the body when the soul was forbidden to speak. In late 19th century Europe, women were everywhere, suffering from unexplained paralysis, fainting spells, memory loss, temporary blindness, even seizures. Doctors were baffled. Nothing showed up in scans, no disease, no virus. The diagnosis they were given? Hysteria, from the Greek hystera, meaning womb. That's right. The medical establishment literally believed women's uteruses were making them go insane. But Freud, along with Joseph Breuer, saw something deeper, something darker. They began listening, not dismissing. And the more they listened, the more they discovered a haunting pattern. These women weren't faking. They weren't weak. They were carrying unbearable truths. Take Anna O, one of the most famous case studies in early psychoanalysis. Anna developed a strange collection of symptoms after her father died. Temporary blindness, paralysis of limbs, and inability to drink water despite being desperately thirsty. But there was no physical cause. Through the process of what she called the talking cure, Freud and Breuer uncovered a traumatic emotional landscape. She had nursed her dying father alone. She had repressed her anger at the suffering. She had internal conflicts about her own unspoken desires. The paralysis, a symbol, her body locking down as her psyche did. The thirst, a manifestation of emotional deprivation and of guilt. Her body was saying what her mouth could not. Freud realized something revolutionary. Hysteria wasn't madness. It was meaning, encrypted in the body. When a woman had no safe space to express rage, grief, sexual desire, or power, her psyche rerouted it into the flesh. A locked jaw symbolized silenced anger. Trembling hands mirrored unprocessed fear. Temporary blindness reflected emotional denial. The unconscious doesn't speak in words, it speaks in symbols. And hysteria? It was the subconscious screaming through symptoms. But why women? Why was this diagnosis so gendered, so disproportionately female? Because in Freud's time, and still today in subtler ways, Society trains women to perform normalcy no matter what they're feeling. Be calm, be composed. Don't yell, don't want too much, don't break down. So where does the rage go? Where does the trauma live when no one believes you? Or worse, when you're blamed for it? In the body, in symptoms. In what Freud called conversion. Emotions too dangerous to express are converted into physical ailments. It's not manipulation. It's not attention-seeking. It's survival. Modern psychology now calls this conversion disorder, or functional neurological symptom disorder. The symptoms are real, but the cause is psychological, not physical. And it's more common than you think. Today, women are still misdiagnosed with anxiety when they have heart conditions, told they're too sensitive when they report medical issues, labeled dramatic for expressing distress in emotional relationships. The ghost of hysteria hasn't vanished. It's evolved, but here's what's truly haunting. Many women don't even realize they're suppressing anything, because repression doesn't feel like hiding. It feels like, I'm just tired all the time. I guess I'm just anxious. I don't really know what I want. These aren't signs of weakness. They're symptoms of silence. They're maps of unspoken histories encoded in fatigue, confusion, and emotional numbness. And they often begin long before adulthood. Think of the girl who was molested but told not to tell anyone. The teenager who learned her pain made others uncomfortable. The woman whose emotional boundaries were always crossed, politely, quietly, socially approved. Each of these experiences leaves a scar, not always visible, but stored in the nervous system. Freud saw this pattern over and over, and though many of his conclusions were flawed or oversimplified, one insight remains chillingly accurate. The psyche will protect itself at any cost. Zrenia, even if it means turning against the body. And that brings us to the most important point. Hysteria wasn't just about symptoms, it was about unspeakable truths. Truths about female sexuality shamed, truths about trauma denied, truths about inner conflict ignored. Freud believed that healing wasn't about removing the symptom, it was about decoding it, following it back to the buried story, bringing the unconscious to light so the body could rest. In his words, where it was, their ego shall be. Translation, where chaos ruled, understanding must enter. So what does this mean for women today? It means the pain in your chest might not just be stress. It might be a story no one let you tell. It means the numbness in your relationships isn't just detachment. It might be years of emotional suppression finally catching up. It means your psyche remembers what your conscious mind was trained to forget. And healing doesn't come from perfection. It comes from permission. Permission to feel it all, to express rage without apology, to speak truth without fear of being labeled too much, to stop carrying what was never yours. Because sometimes the body says what the mouth cannot, and if you listen closely enough, you'll realize your symptoms were never random. They were messages, waiting for you to listen. Freud once said, almost in exasperation, the great question that has never been answered, and which I have not yet been able to answer, is, what does a woman want? For over a century, that quote has been repeated as proof of Freud's confusion, his sexism, or his failure to understand women. But what if it wasn't a failure? What if it was an invitation, a dare to look deeper, a recognition that the female psyche is not just complicated, it's forbidden terrain, not because it's chaotic, but because what women want often violates the scripts they were taught to follow. And that, Freud knew, is where things get dangerous and real. Let's get brutally honest. What women are allowed to want is a short list. Security, romance, companionship, not too much sex, not too much ambition, soft power, never direct dominance. But what many women actually want is far more conflicted, far more instinctive, far more uncomfortable. They may want to submit and dominate, to be taken and to be free, to be worshipped and ignored, to be chosen but not possessed, to be desired but never owned. It's not about contradiction, it's about duality, and that duality is not a flaw. It's a map of the unconscious. Here's where Freud's ideas crack open something raw. He believed that much of female desire isn't rational, not because women are irrational, but because desire itself doesn't follow logic. It follows symbolism. It speaks in the language of dreams, instincts, memory, and myth. So when a woman says she's attracted to danger, to men who don't treat her right, to power she can't explain, it's not because she wants pain. It's because her unconscious has fused pain and love, wanting and rejection, need and shame. She may crave closeness, but the only closeness that feels real is the one she has to earn, chase, bleed for. Why? Because that's how she first learned what love feels like, in her family, in her culture, in the secret corners of her mind. Let's go deeper. Many women are taught that they should want safety, but some of them secretly want to be undone. Not in a reckless way, not in a self-destructive way, but in a way that allows them to drop the performance, to stop holding everyone else, to feel the rawness of surrender, not to a man, but to themselves. But that kind of surrender requires trust, and trust is terrifying, because if she lets go, who catches her? Who sees her in the chaos and says, "You're still lovable"? If she's never had that, then her want becomes a trap. She wants to open, but doesn't know how. She wants intimacy, but only with control. She wants passion, but flinches when it gets too real. And then she tells herself, maybe I'm just too much. Maybe I'm too needy. Maybe I don't know what I want. But the truth? She knows. She's always known. She's just never been given permission to say it out loud. Freud suggested that female desire is disguised, not because women lie, but because they've been taught to protect what they feel, to hide it under layers of social masks. So what comes out often looks like indecision, but is actually disassociation. She doesn't feel in love. Maybe she's bored with safety. She cheats on the man who's perfect. Maybe he never touched the parts of her that ache. She says she wants stability but runs toward chaos. Maybe chaos is the only thing that ever made her feel alive. This is not to justify harmful behavior. It's to understand the psychological maze behind it. Because when women say, "I don't know what I want," what they often mean is, "I've spent my life wanting what I'm allowed to want, and now I don't recognize myself anymore." Let's talk biology for a second. Modern neuroscience confirms something Freud suspected. Women's arousal patterns are more contextual and emotionally complex than men's. Research from Dr. Meredith Chivers shows that women's bodies often respond to a wide variety of stimuli, even those they consciously claim not to enjoy. Why? Because their conscious mind and unconscious responses are often not aligned. In other words, the body knows what the mind won't admit. This is not about being deceitful. It's about being split. Freud saw this split between the id, instinct, the ego, identity, and the superego, morality. And for women, the superego, society's internalized voice, is merciless. Be sexy, but don't enjoy sex too much. Be confident, but don't be intimidating. Be authentic, but make sure it's likable. This voice doesn't just police behavior, it warps desire. And so, what a woman wants becomes buried beneath what she should want, until one day she looks in the mirror and says, "Why am I unfulfilled? Why doesn't anything feel real anymore?" Because what she's chasing isn't her own desire, it's a performance of it. So how do you find out what a woman truly wants? Here's the truth Freud hinted at but never dared to say clearly. You don't ask her to explain it. You make her feel safe enough to stop explaining at all. Desire emerges when the performance dies, when she stops curating herself, when she's no longer trying to be desirable but simply is. And yes, that may mean tears. It may mean anger. It may mean truth she's never dared to speak. But it also means awakening, not just sexually, but existentially. So what do women want? Freedom, but not the kind you post online. The kind that lets them feel everything without shame. They want depth, not in a man, but in themselves. In love, in power, in surrender, in silence. They want the truth, even when it terrifies them. And most of all, they want to stop pretending they don't want anything at all. Every woman has a shadow, not the cute kind, not the misunderstood Disney villain. I'm talking about the part of her that watches from behind her eyes. The one who knows when she's lying to herself. The one who wants, who rages, who manipulates, who seduces, who remembers everything she was told to forget. This is the part Freud feared and secretly admired. The part society tried to tame, chain, or medicate. But she never really went away. She became the shadow queen, the embodiment of the female unconscious, raw, powerful, repressed, and more honest. than the entire persona she built to survive. Let's go back for a moment. Freud believed that repression is a necessary function of the psyche. Without it, we'd be wild animals, all impulse, no order. But too much repression creates something worse, a divided self. And for women, that division often happens early. Be the nice girl, be polite. Don't be so emotional, don't compete, don't speak like that, don't want like that. So what does she do? She splits. One self smiles, the other grits her teeth. One self gives, the other waits. One self says, "I'm fine." The other whispers, "Break something." That second self, the silenced one, doesn't disappear. She becomes the shadow queen. She watches, she waits. And sometimes, she takes the wheel. You see her in women who suddenly snap. In the calm, composed mother who throws a plate against the wall. In the girlfriend who gaslights her partner with surgical precision. In the good girl who transforms into a ruthless businesswoman overnight. The shadow queen is not evil. She's honest. She holds the rage, the lust, the ambition, the grief, everything the polite self wasn't allowed to carry. And when she rises, she doesn't ask for permission. She reclaims what was stolen: power, voice, autonomy. But here's the twist. If you ignore her for too long, she turns toxic. She becomes passive-aggressive. She sabotages relationships. She weaponizes silence. She plays the victim. She manipulates not out of cruelty, but out of desperation, because no one ever listened to her when she asked nicely. This is what Jung, Freud's once close student, called the shadow, the parts of us we disown, exile, repress. Freud saw it as symptom. Jung saw it as a path to wholeness. Both agreed on this. What we repress controls us. In mythology, the shadow queen is everywhere. In Lilith, the first woman exiled for refusing to submit. In Persephone, kidnapped into the underworld, then ruling it. In the witch archetype, feared not because she harms, but because she knows. These aren't stories about evil. They're stories about women who refused to be small, who descended into their unconscious and came back with power society didn't know how to handle. Today, the shadow queen doesn't wear a crown. She wears doubt. She hides behind overachievement. She lurks beneath people-pleasing. But when she's integrated, when a woman stops fearing her own darkness, she becomes magnetic. Not because she's perfect, but because she's whole. Let's talk relationships. A woman disconnected from her shadow often overfunctions in love, chooses partners she can fix, swallows resentment until it poisons her. But a woman who knows her shadow, she doesn't settle, she doesn't beg, she doesn't manipulate because she doesn't need to. Her power is clear, not performative. And ironically, that self-possession makes her more attractive, not just romantically, existentially. People feel her presence because she's no longer running from herself. So how does a woman integrate her shadow queen? She stops asking for permission to feel. She gets curious about her own darkness. Why did I want to hurt him when he ignored me? Why do I feel jealous of her? Why do I flirt when I don't want anything? Why do I crave control more than connection? Not to judge, to understand, to listen to what's real even when it's messy. Because realness is not the opposite of beauty, it's the root of it. Here's the final, most dangerous truth. The feminine was never meant to be tame. She is cyclical, emotional, intuitive, wild. When cut off from her shadow, she becomes hollow. But when reunited with it, she becomes sovereign. Not dependent, not polite, not nice. But sovereign, the kind of woman whose silence makes rooms shift, whose yes means something because her no is powerful too, whose presence doesn't seek validation, it radiates truth. So what do we do with the shadow queen? We stop shaming her. We stop locking her away. We stop calling her crazy, too much, or toxic, because she's not your enemy. She's your ally. She's the guardian of your boundaries, your rage, your sexuality, your depth. She is the only one who will never lie to you. And when you sit with her, when you let her speak, you stop being a passenger in your life. You start being queen of the inner kingdom. You don't have to be afraid of your shadow, because she's not here to destroy you. She's here to set you free. Right now, there are 2 videos on your screen, handpicked just for you. Click to watch them. I'm sure you'll love every second.